and recognize its transformative potential for them. That is an enduring legacy of economic empowerment of the ordinary people of our country. We are proud to stand on that record and to pledge to continue to work in that vein. Madam Speaker, it wasn't easy, I remember as a youth in Beckley, you're listening to radio when Sir James was in the house. It was people tuned in like you're listening to cricket. Because he spoke with such eloquence and brought the problems of the people to this chamber in a way that was not done before. He elevated the discourse in this house and made it the business of the people, not just the business of politicians. And he coupled that during those early years, crisscrossing the country in his little Volkswagen. I remember that. The Beetle. And then the fishing boats going down to the Grenadines, to Mustique and Canawan. And just last weekend, I was speaking to a friend of his who had been there in those early days. Reaching out to people, engaging them, and letting them know that things could be better in this country. And once he was elected, he set about with vigor, determination, skill to bring that about. Madam Speaker, Sir James founded with fellow travelers the New Democratic Party in 1975. That, no matter your political coloration, is an important political institution that helped to preserve and to foster, to promote the flowering of democracy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I feel honored, Madam Speaker, to be leading this great party that he founded. And through the hard work and dedication of Arnhem Eustace, kept it alive and strong. And hopeful, not just for ourselves, Madam Speaker, but because we understand its importance in the historical development of our country and in the future progress of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So James was a visionary of tremendous ability and courage. So much of his political work in the early days were done just by dint of his personality and his determination with the support of others. His profound and enduring love for our people kept him engaged and working throughout his life. In the 20 years following his retirement from Parliament, he didn't become a recluse and simply withdrew and said, my time was well spent. Let others do it. His approach was that if you have a contribution to make, which he did up until the very end, that he would continue to make it and use his vast experience, his wisdom for the benefit of those who would come after, for the benefit of political leaders and friends throughout the Caribbean. In fact, beyond on the world stage. He was an advisor, counselor, friend, and people knew that when you ask Sir James for advice, you better be prepared to accept his answer. Because he told it like it is, or like it was, because in all things, he felt that being true and honest was the best way in which to render that advice. I will miss him dearly, Madam Speaker, because I benefited a lot from that. And as I said, what people don't understand, people see Sir James as this political figure, this towering man, physical stature, and in terms of his intellect and legacy. But he had a tender side. He really genuinely relished when any single individual, especially persons of modest means, succeeded, whether academically, in business, in whatever area, and whatever assistance he could render, he gave it. I speak from personal experience, Madam Speaker. And I know that there are many others who would say likewise. I believe as a nation, we were fortunate that Sir James chose public service and that he did so, he pursued it throughout his long life. He was an educated man in a time when it was difficult to get university education. He was a talented person, brilliant mind. He could have had success in many other choices of a career, but he chose to come here to seek to serve his people to our eternal benefit. He chose to use his talents, his training, his accomplishments, his preparation to serve his people. In that, Madam Speaker, he was a true nation builder. That is undeniable. And more will be said about all that he accomplished for the lives of our people. But in this chamber, where it all started so many years ago, back in the 60s, some of the people in here weren't even born. He didn't see limitations, all he saw were possibilities. How much better things could be. How much grander life could be. How much sweeter life could be here in our blessed country. While we are saddened by his death, we also know that we must celebrate his life. All of us who knew him and benefited from his work, and that's many, we have a duty to proclaim his accomplishments and to acknowledge his legacy. For nowadays, it has become far too easy for many of us, or many among us, to let go of the past, not realizing or acknowledging how much they owe to it, and including the many things that they enjoy because of the efforts of Sir James, Mitchell, and those who toiled with him. Madam Speaker, Sir James didn't leave it up to others to write of what he accomplished. He did that himself. He was an excellent writer. And one of his last projects, even as he grew ill, was to seek to complete a book that he was writing. The last time I visited him, Madam Speaker, he had been recovering from a fall, but he had been working. And there was a bag, a shopping bag next to the chair that I was about to sit in, and he said, "Lift that." And I lifted it, and I said, "It was heavy." He said, "Yeah, that is the book I tell you about. You need a little editing." I had to type it up, because it was handwritten, of course. But I remember his words. He said, "But it's all there." This is a man 90 years old, in considerable pain because he had suffered a fall. But he had this drive. He wanted to get this done because he had to record for posterity things that he thought mattered to our country. And I'm sure we will all hear from him again when that is published. Madam Speaker, I will have other opportunities to speak on behalf of my friend and mentor, and I will hopefully do justice to what he means, not just for us personally, to this country. Many will come and they will pay tribute. And I will seek to say, in a paragraph or more, what Sir James meant. And it doesn't matter, in my view, how much they can say, there will still be so much more that is left unsaid. It is for us, and I say this on behalf not just of Sir James, but for all persons who engage in public service and do so with the diligence, dedication, and longevity that Sir James did, that our nation must recognize, cherish, and honor that contribution. I want to say in this honorable House, so long, Sir James. In years past, the halls of this chamber ricocheted your voice beyond here into the airwaves, the radio station at the time, into the homes of people throughout our blessed land, giving them hope, letting them know that here in this chamber, you were there to represent them, first and foremost. And you did it well. Your example has been an inspiration to many. Madam Speaker, I know there will be many recognitions, but today I wish in this honorable House to conclude by saying that Sir James Mitchell must stand, and I trust young people will read and inquire and be inspired by his example, as we were so many years ago. I admired him in my youth. As with many others, I grew to love him as a friend and as a mentor. And in this chamber, on behalf of my family, my constituents,
I recognize the Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable Prime Minister, before you begin, I wish to remind members that there is a sitting of
Madam Speaker, honorable members. I ceded the opening slot for the paying of the tribute here in this House to Sir James. I ceded the slot, the opening slot, to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition because he currently heads an organization, the New Democratic Party, which is one of Sir James's important political legacies. That party being one of the two important parties of state in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Madam Speaker, I'm the only person currently in this House who was a member of this House when Sir James sat as parliamentary representative for the Northern Grenadines and as Prime Minister. I was here for the last 7 years or so of his long years as parliamentary representative and of his extended run for 16 years or thereabouts as Prime Minister. Because I hold the office as Prime Minister for a few years longer than he held, I have an appreciation of the nature of the work that he did and the challenges which he encountered. The bare bones of Sir James's political history are well known. In the aggregate, he was a parliamentary representative for about 34 years, from 1966 to 1979. In the elections of 1979, he stood him in good stead years later. And he returned, of course, as representative in the Grenadines, that anyone in living memory may get to that number 34. It's possible, but unlikely. He was a minister of government between 1967 and 1970 in the St. Vincent Labour Party government headed by Robert Milton Cato of blessed memory. And he was premier 1972 to 1974 and was in the opposition various times as leader between 1974 and 1984, because there were some musical chairs in the opposition. Those were challenging years, but we know that in July 1984, his beloved NDP won, and he continued in office until he demitted voluntarily on October the 27th, 2000. He would comment to me from time to time in the more recent years, and we spoke very frequently, that he and I were a club of two. So I will tell him no, that we are a club of three, meaning three prime ministers, well, one sitting and two former prime ministers were alive. He said, no, we are in an exclusive club of two because we were both elected by the people directly. And he would laugh at that. It is when one looks back and the assessment of a person who has just died is always something very difficult. Somebody who has served for such a long period of time. And he was a servant of the people. To assess fully the extent of his legacy, there was on the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution, one leading political figure and intellectual in France was asked by an American journalist, what do you consider to be the impact of the French Revolution? And the answer was, it was too early to say. So whatever we do, we are writing in a sense here today an historical review, which undoubtedly would undergo revision as the years go by. And today is the day for us to talk about his positive legacies. Madam Speaker, I'm always reminded when we are paying tribute to noble sons and daughters and distinguished leaders of the advice tendered by Pericles, in his famous funeral oration, which was presented to us by the ancient historian Thucydides in his classic work on the Peloponnesian Wars. And Pericles advised that when someone dies and before you bury him, you must function from the basis that upon his death and before his burial, all contestation ceases. It is in fact something which our families have taught us, that if you don't have anything good to say about somebody who has died, don't say anything at all. That is a representation of that principle. And I urge that, particularly in this case, because being a political personality, you will have persons who would want to speak about negative legacies. But clearly that's not for today. And we must not at all be tempted to do so. Certainly that wouldn't be done in the House, but it ought not to be done across the homes and the various media platforms to which individuals are available. So with that particular guidance, I would say that among the major positive legacies of Sir James, first of all, the founding and nurturing of the NDP. It's not easy to establish and nurture a political party and lead it to victory and see that it is sustained after you have left. It is a matter that I understand very, very well. And I know what is involved, including the personal sacrifices of a material kind which you have to make in so founding and nurturing an institution. And then, of course, there's this positive legacy of land reform, particularly north of the Dry River. But not only there. There is the positive legacy in many different areas, and we can peruse the laws and we can look at certain developments in the state administration to see that he contributed immensely to the further modernization of the state administration, a process which his predecessor in office, Robert Milton Cato, had made an important contribution. And then there is his delivery, Sir James's delivery of basic services to some of the more neglected geographical areas of our country. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition mentioned a few of them. He has overall a legacy, clearly, undoubtedly, a devotion to public service and a love for the people. You don't serve for as long as a parliamentary representative and don't have love for the people. The people sense it, you know. They know whether you have it or you don't have it. Sometimes they take a little while to find out that you really don't love them. But once they give you a long run, you can rest assured that they have seen that you have a communion with them and a love of and for them. And then there is his legacy of commencing a transformation, particularly in the latter years of his prime ministership, of the economy of this country from a goods-based one to increasingly a service-based one. A process which has been accelerated over the last 20 years, without in any way diminishing the importance, clearly, of agriculture and forest and fisheries and manufacturing and other goods-based economic activity. And then his profound, deep-seated regionalism. And I can tell you this, there is an outpouring from across the region of an appreciation that of the work he did in the area of regional integration, which he and I agreed were vital for the sustainable development of our Caribbean civilization. And all of these things, Madam Speaker, then can be documented. Indeed, in my book, The Political Economy of the Labor Movement in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I made an assessment of all these things. Of course, you will find in the volume critical assessments too, but I'm talking about the highlights of his legacy. The personality of Sir James is a fascinating one. And I've always felt that here was a man who was profoundly part of the society, but yet, because of his socialization, his intelligence, the manner in which he grew up and saw himself, that he had the ability to stand apart from it while he was very much intimately involved in it and its development. And I believe that there are persons who are listening to me would identify a number of other individuals, people in their communities and elsewhere, who are part of this society. We're devoted to it, we contribute immensely to it, but yet have an ability, nevertheless, to stand apart and to analyze critically what is taking place in our country, what has taken place, and what the future would be like. Sir James was a family man. He loved his daughters very dearly, and he spoke to me all the time about them. He was very humorous, and he was very generous with his time and generous with his personal resources. My relationship with him, Madam Speaker, I can trace in a sense from 1966. I first met him on the road, on the streets of Kingstown. He had returned in 1965. I was then just a little short of 20 years old. Walking about the town, and people would remember him in his khaki pants and his a shirt which is either a kind of khaki-looking shirt or some other shirt. He was an unfussy dresser. he wasn't so particular about any formal dress code. It was much later, certainly after he became prime minister, he tended to pay a little bit more attention to his formal dress. But you got the impression that in him there was a rebellious spirit. And you know, when you in the 1960s, when they coming out from the 50s, there's a lot of conformism. And to see this tall man, bearded, walking down the street and would stop and talk to a young fellow, and we'll have an engaging conversation. He did it with a number of youngsters. And it fitted in with your sense of an anti-colonial spirit. Of course, I was much later to understand, certainly at the time of the referendum, that he held, while he was anti-colonial, he held, nevertheless, Her Majesty and the monarchy in very high regard. And we had a different view on that at that particular point in time, but that's not for today. And then I saw him at Connery again before I went off to Jamaica to study, campaigning for the Labour Party. Then in 1968, 69, I can't remember quite which year, Madam Speaker, we met in meeting, some regional meeting. Carifta had been established in 1968, and there was always discussions on regionalism as the base of Carifta expanded. And there was a symposium on the campus on regionalism. And he was in the audience, and we spoke quite a lot about regionalism and the future of the regional movement. And he was, I recall, very disappointed at the slow pace. And naturally, all of us were very disappointed that the Federation had collapsed just a few years earlier in 1962. In 1970, I came home, Madam Speaker, to do field research for my master's degree. And he gave me an interview. Well, the interview in relation to my research turned into a long discussion about comparative politics, economy, agriculture, the future of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and these islands. That the time ran out. Went to his office at the Ministry of Agriculture. And he said to me, listen, Ralph, I have to do something personal down at Customs. He said, let's continue to talk while we go down there. He came out, he had a mini moke. And he drove me down to Customs where he was doing his business. And when we were parting, he said, "You're going to have lunch?" I said, "Yes, I'm going to have lunch." He said, "Well, I know students don't usually have money." He said, "Hold this $20." And I got a lunch from him. And then I never spoke about this really publicly before. I told Louise about it. We kept in touch intermittently. And when I was in Uganda as an exchange research student from University of Manchester, in addition to my research, I took time out to write an extensive paper on land reform and sent him a copy. In fact, I sent 3 copies to St. Vincent. One to him, and one each to 2 comrades of mine, Casper London of blessed memory and Hugh Raggy. I think Hugh Raggy still has a copy. I can't find mine. And Sir James wrote me back and congratulated me about it. And in fact, when I'd finished my PhD and I came home after his government fell, in September, I think it was in 1984. He spoke about this paper, and he appreciated it very much. When I was lecturing at Cave Hill, when I was transferred from Mona, I got a call one day from Philip Graves, 1978, who was his friend. Philip Graves taught at school and a political colleague of Errol Barrow, who incidentally was a good friend of Sir James. And Philip says, Son Mitchell here want to talk to you, Ralph. And he came on. He said, I want you to be part of the NDP for the 1979 general elections. You say your brother Bruds was on the ticket in 74 before the NDP was formed. So I told him I didn't think that I could manage it because I was already in the ULIMO, and that we are seeking to forge something differently. And from that period onwards, we were political combatants outside on the platform and increasingly, of course, in Parliament. But I want to say this. He and I maintained a deep and abiding respect for each other. And we never allowed whatever we said about each other to interfere with our relationship. And that is why it was very easy after I became Prime Minister for us to talk very often about all sorts of things. When I sat here in the opposition, from that time, we used to share books, to lend each other books and give each other. He had a wicked sense of humor, Madam Speaker. Once, he's sitting over here, I'm there. He comes to me, he said, come. I want to talk to you. The late John Horn was speaking, I remember. I said, I want to listen, John. He said, come, man, come. You can always come back. Just coming on to Christmas. We are finalizing the debate on the budget. He took a book out from a little bag he had. He said, you like Benjamin Franklin writings? I say, he's one of my favorites of the founding fathers in the United States. He said, I bet you didn't see this one. It was an irreverently titled book with some of the offbeat writings of this great American. And he found a great humor in doing things, small irreverent things like that. Of course, generally he was a very humorous man. He introduced me to the Canadian novelist Margaret Atwood, to show the extent to which, and we always be discussing books, what we were reading. He said to me, Ralph, they only across the whole of the Caribbean since independence. He said, maybe it's only 4 of us who are prime ministers who write on an ongoing basis. He said, Eric Williams, Michael Manley, and you and me. I said, well, unless I write, I can't live. I have to be writing all the time. And when I went to see him at the hospital, and Dr. Thomas was there, and Frankie Joseph's son, Dr. Joseph, was the deputy commissioner's son, he said, just before he went off to Barbados, he said to me, he said, last night, I write another chapter of my book, because we always talked about how we write in our head first before we actually put it down on paper. And the Honorable Leader of the Opposition is quite correct. He is very much in possession of his his thinking, his memory was very much alive. And he was not afraid, in the interest of the country, to take on even his party, because the last issue on which he spoke publicly was the issue of the necessity and desirability to have requirements for certain public frontline workers, requirements for the vaccine. Indeed, he was urging such a public policy publicly for months. And I kept saying, well, you have to have a discussion, you have to do things in a timely basis. But he took on even those who normally would be within his camp. And that, to me, is an important legacy of Sir James. He said, when he famously said, I have led you for a long time. If you do one thing for me, one remaining thing, take the vaccine. He spoke at a funeral. He spoke about the vaccine. It was a matter which he was very strong on, because he saw that it is necessary during a pandemic to take the vaccine for lives and livelihoods. So today, we say farewell in the House to someone, Madam Speaker, who has gone as a Viking, has gone to the legendary Valhalla. Agronomist, distinguished political leader, author, regionalist, patriot, servant of the people, family man. And on that last conversation which we had, before I left, he said to me with some finality, Ralph, I know that you and I love our people. Sir James loved the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and he served with distinction. On behalf of the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, on my own personal behalf and that of my family, I extend sincerest condolences to the family and friends, and to the current members and supporters of the New Democratic Party, our sincerest condolences. May he rest in peace.
Honorable Member for the Southern Grenadines. Honorable Member, I remind you that you are to avail yourself of the speaking booth as per the protocols as approved by the National Emergency Management Organization.
Madam Speaker,
Honorable Member.
just can I make one statement? I would have loved to make tribute to Sir James, the man who mentored me and made sure that I'm in the House. And I see it as an honor for me to speak, especially from the seat that he
Yes, Honorable Member, just a moment.
Okay.
The rules are the rules, and I just have to uphold them. Okay, very well. Any further contributions on the obituaries? See the Honorable Minister of Urban Development.
Madam Chair, I rise to pay a short tribute to Sir James Mitchell, a man I have known for many, many years. My first interaction or knowledge of Sir James was in 1966 when he ran for the Labour Party in the Grenadines. My dad took the entire family down to Beckway every single summer, August, for 2 or 3 weeks on Friendship Bay. And on election day, we happened to have been there. And in those days, all the vehicles that were in Beckway were Land Rovers. And my younger brother and I decided, so James Mitchell at that time, son Mitchell, had rented all the Land Rovers to transport persons to vote. And my brother and I decided that we will ride for the day. It so happened that heading down into Paget Farm, right at the area that the honorable member for the Northern Grenadines continued to bluff, there was always a bump in the road, and the Jeep fly over the bump, and I fell off and sprained my big toe. And I went back home. I wasn't a voting age. I was about 15 at the time, but I suppose ending up in politics years later, I believe that I had it from early days. Madam Speaker, Sir James has served this country well. He has been our political opponent. He first Premier and second Prime Minister, second longest serving Prime Minister. He led a political party that won 4 consecutive elections. And in 1998, when the results came out of the elections, I believe that Sir James said, "Time I hand this over to somebody else." And in 2000, he retired, undefeated. Sir James was knighted in 1995. So he carried Premier, he's Sir James, and the second longest serving Prime Minister in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He has a lot of other accolades, but I'm dealing at that political level. Sir James, as the Prime Minister said, very casual man on the street. I remember him in his early days, famous Volkswagen Beetle, which eventually became the first car that I bought since I started to work. Not his car, but a Volkswagen Beetle. I just loved the way he carried himself. When he won in 1984, I was the assistant manager of the National Commercial Bank. Claude Samuel, who was then the manager, was on vacation. And the usual changes that take place after an election is held. The management of the National Commercial Bank was changed. Claude Samuel as manager and myself as assistant manager. I sought an audience with him early in an official capacity, and he entertained me in his office, and we chat for a while. And then in 1980, 7 months later, in February of 1985, when the bank itself made the decision to change management, he met me on the street one day and said, "Julian, you must," Francis then, he said, "Francis, you must come and see me." And I had a second audience with him post the change. Years later, after the 21 election, we met in a social private gathering. And I said to him then, and when Prime Minister Gonzalez says that James Mitchell had a great sense of humor, when he said wicked, I would say he had a great sense of humor. I said to him, maybe that's the mistake you made in 1994 when you removed me as a banker. And today, you know, I joined the political race and contributed to the change of government in 21. And we had a big laugh about it. We never had any animosity to each other. In fact, we have been pretty personal on a one-on-one. I knew two of his daughters. Well, I knew of Sabrina as well, but I more closely really was in contact with Louise. And I knew Gabby. Well, I know Gabby. Gabby is the daughter of Jeanette Williams Kade, who I have had a lifelong friendship relationship in 1973-76 when I worked in St. Lucia. Jeanette also worked, that time she was working in St. Lucia. And we have maintained that personal relationship over the years. Gabby is now I believe a 31-year-old woman. So it's been almost a lifetime, or half of a lifetime. But Jeanette, I called her and I called Louise, extending my condolences. And I want to reiterate the statement that Prime Minister Gonzalez made. Sir James was never afraid to speak his mind. He's very blunt. You can hold it against him if you wish to. But the man that he is, he says something. Remember he said it, but it never affected your relationship. But one of the last things that Sir James said to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, get yourself vaccinated. It's the only tool in the toolbox. And that was his last, I believe, one of the last public statements he made. It's been played on the radio every single day by most of the radio stations. So James and my father had a working relationship. My father, Manny Francis, died in 2011. And the type of man Sir James is, Sir James actually sent me a personal sympathy card expressing condolences with some nice soft encouragement about and kind words about my father and his contribution to agriculture in St. Vincent. As I said, we shared a personal friendship and we never got politics involved. We argued and discussed politics from time to time when we meet, but we have never been enemies. So James had his work to do. I had my work to do, and he did his well. I believe I did my own purpose well, and he has lived with us for 90 years. My father died in 2011 at 84. My father was born in 1926. He was born in 1931. So he was 5 years older than Sir James. But I always enjoyed his company whenever we got together. And I wish to express my personal condolences myself, on behalf of my family, to the family of Sir James Mitchell, and may God have mercy on his soul, and may perpetual light shine upon him.
I recognize the member for Central Kingstown.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the privilege to share in remarks to the life and times of a great man, founding father of the New Democratic Party, Sir James Mitchell. Madam Speaker, I indicate that I acknowledge the 3 minutes limitation, but do not confine myself. Yeah, that's how I am. I will not. Madam Speaker, before I go further, is the fixture of the plastic there so constructed that it could not be moved around to accommodate my colleagues in the House to speak as a compromise?
It's significantly heavy.
But not
Significantly heavy.
to the point that we couldn't have an accommodation.
Well, we've made the necessary logistical determinations, and that is where it is best suited, given a lot of factors.
Yes, so
we
James
thought
wouldn't-
about it.
So James would not have loved that, Madam Speaker. It really.
I'm not so sure about
I
that.
I have differences with on the vaccine matter, and my colleagues will come to their own solution. I don't even know if on the other side they're all vaccinated, but I don't want to be distracted by that argument.
Yes.
I think we could make a better effort in accommodating my colleagues
Well,
on
we've
their
taken
on
all the
their on their
advice.
conscious decision.
Yes, we've
on their
taken all the
conscious-
advisement,
conscious.
and that is the decision.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, I'm indeed grateful for the contributions made on both sides of the House. First by my President of the New Democratic Party, honorable member for the Northern Grenadines. I thought it was an excellent contribution. In the same way that I acknowledge the presentation from the Honorable Prime Minister to be very revealing. And I'm also grateful for the comments from for the member on the other side, Honorable Minister Francis, Minister of Urban Development, etc. Madam Speaker, the passing of Sir James is by any measure the end of an era. Over the last 20 years that I've been in this House, we have lost some very great politicians on both sides of the House. The danger of identifying and singling out members is present always. On the other side of the House, they would speak about Sir Vincent Beach, who certainly made his mark. We lost in this House our Governor General. The late John Horn comes to mind on this side of the House. Mr. Denny, Honorable. In that way, it's just been a long list of distinguished Vincentian patriots. And I repeat myself, Sir James's passing to me is a culmination. Yes, we have present, in a historical sense, the current sovereign prime minister, who has a long historical service as well. So it doesn't quite represent a changing of the guards, but it is a demarcation in the passage of time. So James came to my attention pretty much the same way as has been represented earlier today. As a simple, ordinary, educated, perhaps privileged, though he never demonstrated it, individual. And many times we as politicians don't know when we got there, how we made those decisions. Who came to a decision of a life of public service. And he distinguished himself. A simple but robust representation in this House in the days when the rules were different. And he would bat whole day, come back the next day, change his guard, and continue his innings, and literally speaking, retire hurt, having made his point, almost always taking on the status quo and championing the cause of the underprivileged and the working class and his greatly loved people of the Grenadines. But even there, Madam Speaker, one could find the distinction as manifested his travels in this country in his now famous, that should have been kept for posterity, Volkswagen, the vehicle, all across St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In the way politics was done, a few of us reflect aspects of it today. But weekends, not because of funeral, was the occasion from north to south, east to west, positioning oneself for service, a life of dedication. I was not initially a member of Sir James's political flock. In the 70s, a young man then, and informed by much of what we have defined in the literature and in political analysis of the New World thinking, I became aligned to that group which was referred to as the Forum Boys, later the DFM, who subsequently joined with other political forces, ULIMO, and contested an election, a party, that contested the election in 1979 under the joint leadership, I believe, of Prime Minister Gonzales Campbell. It may have been Kenneth John. Many people hold today that it is one of the best political parties that ever existed in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I certainly still hold today that it had great hopes for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But alas, today is not the time for that. I don't think it is correct, and this is not the proper thing to do perhaps, but I say it because it's formulated in my mind already, that Sir James was in opposition to Minister Francis and company. It would certainly be more correct to say that they were in opposition to him and subsequently succeeded. But the order is important. I had the privilege to have served in his 1984 administration after our UPM lost its way and different members went in different directions. found difficulty in regrouping. The politics of Grenada, Cord and Bishop made it difficult for political representation of our aspirations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I became a belated member, maybe 82 or 83 of the New Democratic Party. So that in 84, and I'm told by the racist, a person who was not very literate, but he would often say that I am a member of the B team, of which he is the leader. Of course, that time I had a university degree, but common sense and political sense are two different sense. And Bandy Weiss and company had the whole matter of speaking and calculating and representation. If he says so, it was so. I was a member of the B team on the Bandy Weiss and company and appeared in the political platform and made my remarks. Of course, it was a lot. The Prime Minister nodded me talk about this. Campbell had come over as well. We had brought Campbell back home, disrupted his doctoral studies to lead the party and all the sorts of things, There was this new configuration. The victory in 84 by Sir James was historic. Many said that you a bunch of inexperienced public servants, business people. Eddie Griffith comes to my mind here, blessed memory. But I make the point, Madam Speaker, of Sir James's success in 84 this way. The distinguished patriot, politician and servant of this nation and of blessed memory, Robert Milton Ketu, uncontested father of the nation in 79, could not convince the people in 84 as father of the nation that he had done the job that he wanted in his 5 years. So James, from 84 to 89, and you could give him a title, stepfather is probably not appropriate, went in the different direction of success and got all 15 seats. And one has to interpret it that the populace were of the conclusion that he had properly interpreted the opportunity for independence. And as history would reveal, Sir James's profound belief in creating a landed democracy. H.V. Suso and John Thompson used to have a slang, he who owns the land owns the country. A truism may have helped him a great deal in his political sojourn. But in addition to creating that landed democracy in the acquisition of lands in the north of the country, South Central Windward and in the North Leeward area as well, acquiring the plantations from the landed gentry, giving it up, take a piece so that people progress from hard farm labor to a strong middle class cannot be undervalued. He also made, Madam Speaker, a sterling, seminal, groundbreaking contribution when he acquired the Michael lands at Villa for a public purpose. I had in my early years been a teacher at the grammar school and taught the sixth form, which accommodated the grammar school, high school, and maybe one or two fortunate other students who got there. But that movement from the grammar school to the extended campus facility that is now sprawling and growing in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, by this administration's contribution, was another important contribution, so that by the 90s, he could probably boast that we had created another 3,400 middle-class members in St. Vincent through education mobility, through land ownership. I served Sir James as Public Relations Officer of the New Democratic Party, taking over from Baba Siong. And we know public relations then and public relations now to be two different things. Because all one needed was a microphone and a motor car, and you qualified. So James, the Prime Minister acknowledges that to be true. But again, there's method in those people's madness. Politics has really transformed, from the old Market Square days when people had license. And people had license. I served as chairman of National Broadcasting Corporation when it moved from 7 to 5. The Prime Minister would remember fondly that I boldly allowed him to make some presentations at the radio station, and he was subsequently stopped. We were not going to the subject matters, but it had to be a brave decision by yours truly to allow him. Different times. Cobblestone in, deputy chairman to Carl John, and let me just recognize Carl John's the passing of his dear wife at this time, to the extent that they call his name. Markton Corporation. And I was also present as a non-cabinet member in cabinet room when he was meeting with the University of West Indies to put in place that health program for National Health Insurance Program. That is still something that we are aspiring to do in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So James offered me the East St. George constituency in 2001 after the tumultuous years of protests on the streets of Kingstown, and I declined. I like to say that I would have lost then, but I'm certain that I would have been successful by now. So James offered me his party on another occasion. And I declined again out of loyalty. So James spoke to me the Sunday before his passing by way of video. And he kept to me constantly, directly, and with witness to his daughter Lucy at his bedside. Because he wanted to see me continue to assist his great party, and still wants me to do so, to the best of my ability and into the future. There is no doubt, Madam Speaker, that lots of good will be said about him, but as we who are serving now recognize our own mortality, and I don't think as politicians anybody has to remind us of our own imperfections. We confess them ourselves. There can be no doubt whether the history is revised or otherwise. His, Madam Speaker, will be a hard act to follow. He called it as he saw it. I think in this honorable house, there is now Senator Bruce, who was a very young man in his 20s. In the heat of the battle of what became known as the Grand Beach Accord, when the Prime Minister was also present in Grenada. Today, 20-something years after, he is perhaps one of Sir James's legacy, or he's in the house where Sir James probably wanted him to be then and is now. We talk about tributes, when we talk about eulogies, Madam Speaker. It's always a sober time for us who are serving to reflect on our own lives and to draw lessons from those who have gone before us to the great beyond, and to see to what extent, as mortal men, we could moderate our own approaches to living and to serving and contributing to life and livelihoods. I believe it will be fair to say, in all of his great leadership, he never lost that important character of the value of learning to listen and to submit oneself to a greater good. And that's why in the end, he left with that distinction, Prince of Peace. May light perpetual, Madam Speaker, continue to shine upon him. May he, Sir James, rest in peace. Great man, great leader, great legacy. Much obliged.
I recognize the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, and just to remind members that of the sitting of the court below, the High Court.
Madam Speaker, honorable members, I wish to join with all those who spoke before me as I rise to express condolences to the family of the late Sir James Mitchell. Madam Speaker, we are all creatures of time. I was born in the year 1980, so I am 40 years old, which makes me the youngest speaker thus far to offer condolences. My childhood and very young years spanned the entire 1980s and 1990s. So throughout my primary school life, secondary and A-levels, Sir James was the Prime Minister. But it was a different period than now as it pertains to technological advancement. There was no cable TV. In fact, I can remember we had a black and white TV connected to an antenna and a booster. And when the wind blew, if you really wanted to watch the TV, or someone had to be outside holding the antenna while someone watched, and then you switch. There was no internet, no Facebook, no WhatsApp, no Twitter, no Instagram, no cell phones with cameras. It was 7:05, and throughout the country we listened to 12:30 and 7:30 news and death announcement after. Newspapers once per week and SVG TV. So my exposure to his work during those years, Madam Speaker, was very limited. It was not until I entered the St. Martin's Secondary School, I became a member of the Debating Society, formed and headed by Mr. Philbert John, P. John. And one day he decided to bring us to Parliament, this Parliament, about age 14 or 15. And I can remember it well, Sir James as Prime Minister on this side, and he had a very heated debate with the leader of the opposition. then, who's now the current Prime Minister, and there was Sir Louis there and Sir Vincent. Really exciting to the students to listen. We went back to school and we formed a mock parliament debating team. And Pigeon would have us on Friday evenings pretending to be parliamentarians to discuss different topics. Then at the 1998 graduation ceremony, and this speaks to my innocence, politics at the time, at the 1998 graduation ceremony of the A-level college, I was given the opportunity to present the valedictory speech. And Sir James was present. And he spoke before me. And Madam Speaker, in true debating style, I decided to debate his presentation. After which he returned to the podium and did a wrap-up. Of course, you could just imagine what the wrap-up was like. And I had to sit and listen. However, one thing we agreed on that day, and I've used it as a mantra through my life, a statement that he made in his wrap-up, was that there is always room at the top. So keep rising. I was appointed Minister of Tourism in 2010. And upon my appointment, I received a call from Sir James congratulating and offering advice. We had a very long conversation, which almost turned into a day's work. In my capacity as Minister of Agriculture, we did significant work together regarding the cocoa subsector. He was an advocate for diversification in agriculture, and particularly so post the ruling of the WTO in the banana case. And he preached diversification, not as successful in convincing the farming population at the time as much as he would wish, because he was preaching it at a time when persons could not see beyond the excellent state of the banana industry then, and many did not envisage the vagaries of the impact of the WTO case that the nation would grapple with, and we have grappled with over the years. I had the opportunity to work closely with him as well and his daughter Louise on issues touching and concerning conservation. He served his country, his region during his life. May his soul rest in peace.
Any further contributions? Madam Clerk?
Congratulatory remarks.
Madam Speaker, may I just be permitted to, in a sense, Madam Speaker, to just mention three persons' names in respect of obituaries. I didn't want to dilute my presentation in relation to Sir James. I want to recognize the passing of Evelyn Hatcher of South Rivers, 103 years old, of Ansela Balcom of Monbentic, and Mrs. Ruby Sutherland of Monbentic, all of them my dear friends and important persons who have made significant contributions in their respective communities. I don't know if, Madam Speaker, there's anyone else who would like
Yes, I'm
to
seeing an indication from the
mention
leader of the
anyone else's
opposition.
name.
Yes. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I wish to acknowledge the passing of Mr. Patrick Hazel from La Pompe in Beckway. That's how I knew him. He was buried last weekend on Saturday. He was 97 years old. A very good innings right up to pretty much almost to the end. And then also to Mrs. Ali Marks, my good friend from Hamilton, who passed away at the age of 102. And she had, at least the last time I saw her, still hold a good conversation and very sharp. That's a blessing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yes. I recognize the honorable member for Central Kingstown.
Madam Speaker, this is mine, but I'll defer to January. But I thought to the extent that former Member of Parliament, Honorable Alpen Allen, was a serving member and he has lost a brother. Because we are a fraternity, I should at least mention the passing of former Inspector of Police Allen, brother of former Member of Parliament, Alpen Allen. And before my booklets to January 3. Much obliged, Madam Speaker.
Yes. The Honorable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I wish to recognize the passing from the constituency of South Central Windward, the following persons: Ava Brown, Alfred Brown, Teddy Forgas, George Thomas, who had gone past 100, and Alberta Richards of Chapman's. May their souls rest in peace.
Okay. Madam Clerk, I think we can move now to the next item on the order paper.
Congratulatory remarks.
Honorable